Welcome back to Through the Bible Women's Bible Study. Today we're looking at Genesis chapter 31. We're in the middle of Jacob's adventures. He has married Rachel and Leah, and he has 2 concubines and 11 sons and at least 1 daughter, but he's still living in the land of Laban, and he is ready to go home. So let's pick up in Genesis 31. Verse 1 and 2. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all this wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. So what the sons are saying is not true. But Jacob's wealth is growing faster than Laban's. The problem wasn't that Jacob stole, but that Laban's sons were jealous. Envy distorts the truth. Envy poisons the heart. And Laban's sons have turned their heart against Jacob. Remember, Laban agreed to this arrangement in the first place because he thought Jacob would end up on the short side. Well, he hasn't. And now that Jacob's successful, everything changes. Envy is such an ugly thing, but it's so easy to be envious. But God wants to deliver us from envy. Titus 3:3 says, For we ourselves were also once foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving various lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another. Envy is not a small sin. Envy put Jesus on the cross. Matthew 27:18 says, For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. Verse 3, Then the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. Okay, God, marching orders from God. It's going to happen. God had been preparing Jacob for this time. You might even say he was kind of pushing him. And in Genesis 30:25, God gave him the desire to go home. Then his present circumstances made living where he was impossible. Finally, God gave him a personal direction. God can use all sorts of ways to lead us. The most important thing in here is God said he would be with him. What else could you ask for? This is a promise that should provide inner peace, if we let it. God didn't have to tell Jacob twice. He's ready to go. Verse 4-9. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. So Jacob's taking time out to talk. He's taking them away. Is that so no one else can hear this conversation? So Jacob is saying, even though Laban tried to cheat me over and over and over again, God protected him all the time. Jacob not only believed that he had acted appropriately toward Laban, but he also believed that his wives saw how righteous he was and how unfair Laban had been. And so something new we saw here, apparently when Laban saw that Jacob was prospering, he changed the agreement and decided now he would have the striped, spotted flocks. But God continued to bless Jacob. And the new lambs were born without spots or stripes. Then Laban changed it again. But whatever way it was changed, God increased Jacob's flocks. When Jacob says 10 times, That's a Hebrew way of saying a lot, like when we say a ton or a million times. But he wants Rachel and Leah to be his witnesses of his righteousness. Verses 10 through 13. In that breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. So he tells his wives about a dream. In this dream, the angel of God appears. And since it is the angel of God, that means it was Jesus that appeared to him. Now we find out that this spotted, speckled stuff wasn't from Jacob's imagination. God had told him. Now God told him, go back to Bethel. That's where he encountered God in a personal way. That's where he saw the ladder. By saying God of Bethel, he reminded Jacob that he is still the same God who met his needs in the past, and he has continued to meet his needs now. That's a great thing for us to remember. When we're going through a tough time, go back and remember how God has met your needs over and over again. And you'll know that he will continue to meet your needs. Verse 14 through 16. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. Sounds like Rachel and Leah see their father for what he really is. Dad had already used any potential inheritance they might have received. Laban should have set aside a portion of the value of Jacob's work during the 14 years. That was the bride price. It should have been an inheritance. He didn't. So he cheated his daughters too. They're happy to leave. They also say they are supporting Jacob in whatever he did. But think about it. That's a huge family to move. It's probably the first time in a long time that these sisters have agreed on anything. The three of them, Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, are united against a common enemy, Laban. Verse 17 through 21. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had, and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. Jacob planned on making a quick getaway, and in a way, he's cheating Laban again. He didn't give him a chance to say a proper goodbye. It also shows a lack of faith because God told him to go. God would make sure he could go. By sneaking away, Jacob is showing he's afraid of Laban and not afraid of God. He's not trusting God to protect him. So Jacob is wealthy. You can see that because he puts his entire family on camels. Camels were the Teslas of their day. He could have announced his departure and let Grandpa say goodbye, but he sneaks out. Laban was away shearing his sheep. Sheep shearing took large numbers of men for the size of flock they had. It took quite a while to accomplish this. They might have gotten away, but Rachel causes a problem. There might have been several reasons why she stole her father's idols. Could be she worshiped these idols and didn't want to be without them. She did grow up worshiping these idols. Maybe she had discovered the true God and she didn't want her father worshiping these idols. Maybe it's because these idols were considered property and this would be her part of the inheritance. Maybe she was just getting back at Dad for mistreating her and her husband and her whole family. According to ancient records, whoever possesses the household idols becomes the heir. This also means that Jacob has been raising his family in a pagan land, living with pagan idols. His original journey had gone pretty quickly because he was traveling light and fast and running for his life. Now he's 20 years older and he has a whole crew of people with him, including young children. Do you remember taking any road trips as a child? How often did you need to stop? This is nearly 300 miles from Haran to the mountains of Gilead with a big caravan. Jacob left a place that was comfortable to go back to the place God called him, back to Esau. Ugh. Verses 22 through 24, when it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsmen with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." So remember, they snuck out while Laban was shearing sheep, and it took 3 days to notice they were gone. And then it took 7 days to catch up. They were traveling a lot lighter. It says they caught up to them in the hill country of Gilead, so Jacob is almost home. Laban has murderous intent. The words for fled, pursued, overtook, pitched tents, all militaristic. Laban was on the warpath. God was protecting Jacob by appearing to Laban in a dream. This is an example of how God can use anyone he wants to achieve his purpose. We'll see more examples of that later, like Belteshazzar. God tells Laban, "Be careful what you say to Jacob." This whole thing foreshadows the later exodus of the 12 tribes of Israel from Egypt. They go in response to God's call to worship in the land of Canaan. Laban was forced to let Jacob go while Pharaoh was forced to let the Israelites go. Jacob took the spoil from Laban. The Israelites will take the spoil from Egypt. Jacob was pursued by Laban while the Israelites were pursued by Pharaoh, and both are delivered by God. Verses 25 through 30. And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me that so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' And now you have gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" So first off, God said, don't say anything good or bad. It seems like Laban's saying a lot. Some not so good, but some good. But he wasn't supposed to. God told him don't say anything to him. But at this point, Jacob isn't far from the Jordan River in the Promised Land. he traveled pretty far in a quick time. And it also shows that Laban was ready to chase him down a long way. Now, Laban's first words are meant to shame Jacob with kindness. He says he would have given a huge going away party. But you can be sure he wouldn't have let him get away with everything, the flocks and everything. The next words are a threat. I have the power to harm you. When he says, you didn't let me kiss my sons and my daughters, what he really is saying, I didn't get to say goodbye to my grandsons and granddaughters. Then he ends with an accusing question. He knew his idols were missing, and he believed Jacob stole them. It shows how foolish idolatry is. Laban's God can be stolen. We have a God who never can be stolen. Laban doesn't trust Jacob, and Jacob doesn't trust Laban. Something to notice here. There are several times we see the word God in here without it being capitalized. It's different than the one and only God. When talking about God Almighty, our God, it's always capitalized. Verse 31 and 32, Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours, and take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Jacob explains he ran because he was afraid, and then he makes a stupid statement. He really doesn't think anyone in his household had taken Laban's idols. We're going to run into a few situations over time where someone makes a really stupid statement. He pronounces a harsh curse on the thief, not knowing he actually invited judgment on his most beloved wife, Rachel. He invites Laban, search. So, verse 33 through 35. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but he did not find him. And she said to her father, let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the household gods. Well, Rachel, she sure seems to have inherited something from her father and learned something from her husband. Laban's sure his idols are there, and he did a thorough search. But Rachel succeeded in deceiving her father and her husband about the idols. The younger daughter deceives her father just as her husband, the younger son, had deceived his father. So an archaeological discovery shows that a camel saddle doesn't look anything like modern saddles. It was a box about 18 inches long and 14 inches wide. It was bound by straps to the saddle. So she used female issues to hide the idols. Women who were going through that time of month were considered to be impure and contaminating. So by sitting on these idols, she's treating them as worthless and unclean. The reason that Laban doesn't make her move and look upon her is that he would think that Rachel will never commit that kind of sacrilege. But she is. And men are very uncomfortable. Most men are uncomfortable when faced with female issues. It shows how much power these false gods had. The powerless idol was sat upon a menstruating woman, making it useless. Now these idols were usually small figurines, about 2 to 3 inches long. Sometimes they were carried on the body as a charm. Verse 36 through 42. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before your kinsmen and my kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night." Jacob has held this in for 20 years, no more. He is letting it all out, and he brings up everything. It's like a married couple when that start fighting, and they bring up all the unresolved issues over the years. That's what Jacob is doing, and he has lots of arguments. He's saying they didn't steal anything. He served him for 20 years. He took care of Laban's herds with care. He didn't feed himself at the expense of Laban. There was an ancient custom that a shepherd could bring the torn carcass of a sheep to show the owner that he was brave enough to not let the wolf eat it or take it away. Jacob didn't do this. He replaced every animal that was attacked or stolen out of his own herd. He had worked hard as he sacrificed to help Laban be successful in harsh weather. And he had been treated unfairly over and over and over again by Laban. Jacob claimed that God sent him away before Laban could cheat him any longer. Jacob is finally realizing just how much God has been taking care of him all along. Part of this is because he has done his job, and he's done it well. If we do the same thing in our work, God will take care of us. It doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a time to move on. Jacob did move on 20 years later. The fear of Isaac, it means the God who caused Isaac to have fear. And this fear is the awe of God's mighty power. Verses 43 through 50. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for my daughters or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." Therefore he named it Gilead and Mizpah, for he said, "The Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, God is witness between you and me." Imagine Laban standing there swinging his arms and saying, "Everything here belongs to me." He's talking animals, children, grandchildren, everything. "But I'm Mr. Generous, and I'm going to let you have it." And Jacob just rolls his eyes. So they set up an altar to make a covenant. I wonder if they do that, cutting the animals in half and walking through the guts thing. What Laban says sounds really good, but it isn't. The idea is, because I can't trust you out of my sight, if you do wrong, God will see you and may he punish you. could be considered a non-aggression pact. So that name, Jagar Sahathtatha, means the heap that is a sign in Aramaic. Galid means the heap that is a sign in Hebrew. So the reason that for the two languages is this becomes the border between Syria and Israel. Hebrew and Aramaic at that time were fairly close in language, kind of like Italian and Spanish. If you spoke one language, you could probably understand the other. Verse 51 through 55. Then Laban said to Jacob, "See this heap and this pillar which I have set between you and me? This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me, to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, and Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. So look back at verse 45 and look at verse 51. In 45, it says, "So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar." Verse 51, Laban says, "See this heap and the pillar which I have set between you?" So who set the pillar up? Who said they set the pillar up? Laban just has a problem with pride and telling the truth. So the best solution for Jacob's in-laws' problems was to be separate. They would never see each other again. The daughters would never see their father. Laban would not be part of his grandchildren's lives. This is the last time we see Laban. Not bad thing. Laban was of the world. He resented the blessing of God on Jacob. So the next session, we will pick up on Genesis 32, Jacob coming home. And remember who's there, Esau. So thank you for joining. Click like if you've enjoyed this session, and consider subscribing to be notified of further sessions. Thank you again.